Hello, and if you're watching this, you're probably looking for advice about the UKCAt. Hopefully I'll be able to give you quite a bit of it, because I sat my exam yesterday, so this is post-exam advice. Today it's 15th of the 8th, 2013 for your reference, so this should be useful for candidates this year, because I sat it fairly early, and also for people in the future. Okay, so I'm going to go over the basics, but I will put timestamps in the description if you want to skip some of the stuff. You should only have to watch the stuff that's actually relevant for you. Okay, so you probably all know this, but UKCAt is an aptitude test, UK clinical aptitude test. There's 4 main sections. There's a quantitative analysis, which is all quick maths questions. There's a decision analysis, which is coding and kind of like translating. There's abstract reasoning, spotting similarities between sets of shapes, and verbal reasoning. Yeah, so deducing, or not necessarily deducing, but working out things from a passage of text. I'll go into all of those in much more detail later on, but those are the basics. Then there's also a fifth section, which doesn't actually contribute towards your score, but you're put into bands for it, and that's called situational awareness. That's kind of decision making in tough situations, or moral situations they tend to be. Okay, so advice. First thing I can say, this isn't that useful for people this year, but book your UKCAT like far in advance so you have plenty of time to prepare for it. About a month practicing for about 2 hours a day I'd recommend, because any more than that and you're going to start running out of material to revise from, and also you don't need to do it that much, but you don't want to have that much less. If your exam is really close, you can postpone it for free at least once, I think. That may change after like September the 31st, but if you're watching this and it's a week to go and you haven't done any revision, just delay it, because it's tough. But I will say this, it's probably not as bad as you're thinking if you haven't sat it. That's what I came out of the exam thinking. The methods I used to revise for it mainly came from this book, which I'm sure you've all seen. It's credited as being one of the best things to revise for the CAT, and it probably is. It is slightly outdated now for 2013, because I'll go through all the differences. Okay, first of all, for the quantitative section in the book, it's harder than what you'll get in the exam. I know you might not like to hear that, because you want to convince yourself that it's going to be really hard, so then you end up doing better than you thought you would. But honestly, the stuff in the exam isn't easy, it's just it won't take you as much time. And the difference that I found in the exam compared to in the book is that in the exam you may get like graphs and data, but there may only be one question on it. In the book it's like you have some data and there's 8 questions or something, and I think it tells you that you'll have at least 4, but it can just be 1 in the exam. I have quite a few questions like it. They're not that long, so don't worry about that, but that was a bit surprising to see. In the verbal reasoning section, in the book, you're only ever asked to say true, false, or can't tell. Now, you are likely to get questions in the exam which are in that format, but the majority of the questions that I got from watching other videos like this, I've heard other people say, are more like there's 4 statements and you have to say which one best continues on from the text, or what's a good conclusion, or what was the author alluding to, or whatever. So you can't really get any practice from that book on that. You can't get any practice from the book on that. And also having 4 options makes it harder, because you're less likely to get the answer right if you guess, and that generally requires more accurate reading. The abstract reasoning, the spotting differences between shapes, the book prepares you well for it. I actually got full marks in the abstract reasoning, because the book makes you think of every single possibility, and then when you go into the exam, often it's actually pretty simple, the answers, or maybe I just got a bit lucky, but I'm pretty sure it's not as hard as what you get in the book, so don't panic, because I was doing terribly in the book, practicing most of the relationships I couldn't guess. So yep. And then the last one, I'm not very good at it. Decision analysis. kind of coding. So basically, if you don't know, you have a table of codes like 1 equals I or personal or something like that, and then you're given a string of letters and numbers, and it makes this severely grammatically incorrect sentence, and then there's 5 options, and you have to choose which one that fits best. The book is really, really good for preparing you for that. It tells the format is exactly the same in the book as you get in the exam, and it gives you really good advice, and it goes into very in-depth detail about why every single answer is right, but also it tells you why an answer can be wrong. It has like a paragraph on it. It's really good from the book. And the last bit is outdated because it doesn't have the situational awareness section, but I'll go into how you can prepare for that later, because I think this book was last published in like 2010 or something. But apart from those differences, I'll put more in if I remember them later, then it's quite good. The next resource that I used to briefly revise from, because there wasn't much in it, is the official UKCAt app that you can get for Android and iOS, I think. I didn't see that well because of all the shiny light. But anyway, it's good because it's in the format that you'll get in the exam and it's official, but really there's not much content at all. Like, you'll get through everything within like half an hour on it. It does kind of randomly choose the questions. There's like a very mini test, and if you go through that more than once, you'll get slightly different questions. But there's not a lot of content on it, so if you're short or something and you need some practice, yeah, get it, but it's not going to do you much good in the long run, and it's free, so if you have a smartphone you may as well get it. And then finally, the last thing I used to revise was the mocks that UKCAT provided on the website. I'll put a link in the description, and also there's a shortened mock for it. So it's exactly the format that you'll get in the exam. They're about the same difficulty. I think my exam was slightly easier, but you have to remember all the questions in the exam are randomly selected from a big pool of questions, so you might get lucky, like I think I did in my case, and get a fair amount of easy questions, or you may get harder ones. But I'd say it's like the same difficulty as the mocks, really. The shortened mock, which only takes half an hour, it doesn't really represent what you'll have to do in the UKCAT, really. So don't time it and do it, because it doesn't give you an accurate representation of how good you'll actually do in the test, because it's just so short. There's no mental stamina involved. So yes, just you can use that to practice individual questions, but again, it's not much there. Okay, so I've gone through all the revision resources that I used, so those are the only ones I can speak for definitely, but other ones I've had friends talk about. I can give you some insight about how good they are. So it seems, from what I've heard, that basically all of the other UKCAT books aren't as good as the one I showed you earlier. That's the second time I've said that. So I would go for that book, although if you are running short questions, then you may want to get another book. The other main resource that people use that I didn't use is an online service called Medify. There's a UKCAT subscription, but I think it's about £40. Apparently it is really good because it tracks your progress and has a load of questions and stuff. I can't really say how good the feedback is, but I presume it's about similar quality to the book. It's just a lot more expensive than the book, although the book was about £10, but you can probably get it from the library or somewhere, so you may not have to spend any money. And I think that's all of the revisions, guides and stuff. So yeah, the mocks on the website aren't only good because of how well they replicate the actual test, but also because it does let you review your answers afterwards and see which ones you got wrong and which ones you got right, and it does also have a brief explanation of why the answer is correct or how to work this question out or something. It doesn't give great feedback, honestly. It's often very brief, especially for the decision analysis, the coding section. The feedback on the mocks was pretty bad, but for the rest of it, it was alright. Seriously, if you want good feedback for why you've got a question wrong or right, use this book, because it has a lot of detail. I actually wrote down the scores I got from doing the mocks, including it in that book and the two on the website, so I can let you know what those are, and compare them against my actual score, so that might give you some confidence, or well, hopefully confidence. The first mock on the website I got 51%, which works out as a score around 2,400 to 2,500, which is the average. I think the average is closer to 2,500. It's 620 on each section, so that's to compare yourself against. So if you're getting 50%, you're doing about average, which is better than 50% of medical students, which is quite impressive anyway. So it's not bad. The second mock I did, it was the one in the book, and I got 60% on that. So that works out as a score at 2,630, which is a good one. And then for the final mock I did, which was 2 days before I sat the actual exam, I got 65%, so 2,760. So that gave me quite a bit of confidence going into the exam. After going through those scores, it's probably a good time to go into some in-depth detail on how they actually mark the UKCAt and how the score is calculated, because you've probably heard it isn't quite straightforward. Now, to calculate what marks I got in the mock, basically it tells you how many questions you got correct and incorrect on, no, just how many questions you got incorrect and the total number of questions in the mocks. So then you just work out a percentage, how many you got right for each of the different sections. And the score you get from each section is between 300 and 900. So thinking about it, there's only 600 marks so you can actually get, and that's works out to 2,400 possible marks. So if you then find an average percentage and then times like that percentage by 2,400, you get a straightforward mark, and that's, like I say, how I calculated the mocks. But when UKCAt marks your test, it doesn't quite do that. It does some hidden trickery which we don't know about, which we're not allowed to know. Most of this is speculation, but the first bit that isn't speculation is that you're told that to get full marks in the exam, you don't need to get every single question right. You just need to do as well as a person that did best in 2006, which was when the exam was first sat. And I think it's like the best mark for each individual section, not for the same person for every other section. So this is kind of where speculation starts. But basically, realistically, no human being would get 100% in all 4 sections. Or the chances that someone got 100% in every section is really small. So if we say that for each section the average score is 95%, which I think is fairly realistic, because there are some really clever people out there which may get that on 4 sections, so yeah, that's realistic. That means that if you used the mock, the way I calculated my score for the mock to calculate their score, they'd only get 3,480 out of 3,600. They'd have dropped 120 marks. So basically, what I'm saying is that they have to scale up everyone's score by a factor, which in this case I'm guessing is around 100 marks, but speculation. So you have the confidence in knowing that your score that you calculate in the mock, the score you're likely to get in the actual exam is going to be slightly higher. I mean, I reckon that at the extremities of the marks, at the very high end and at the very low end, you may get like that 120 marks, or maybe less. But I reckon towards the middle, then it's likely that the amount of your marks change is going to be less. I mean, going into the exam, I only counted on like 25 to 50 marks being added on, but it's impossible to know for certainty. But do remember that your score is likely to go up at least a little bit compared to your mock. I was planning to, after I had done my actual exam, to write down like the percentage or the number of questions I got right in each section, so then I could actually give quite an accurate number that you'd scale up the marks by, but unfortunately it doesn't actually give you that detail. You just get your mark, but I can tell you my mark, and then compare that. So I have it here for proof that I'm not lying. So you probably couldn't read that, but it doesn't matter. For verbal reasoning, this one I did worse in, 650, which is above average, so I'm still pleased with that. Then quantitative reasoning, 750, abstract reasoning, 900. That's crazy. And then for decision analysis, 880, which is also mental. So that added up to 3,180, which blew me away, honestly. I was not expecting that. So comparing that against my score that I got in the highest mock that I did, that I sat just before the exam, I got 2,760. So I got about 450, 60 marks higher in the actual one that I got in the mock. Now, don't expect that you'll also do the same, because a lot of it was that I was like really going for it on the day, and also I think the questions that I got a bit lucky with them. They weren't as hard as they could have been, but so my earlier estimation of adding 100 marks, it might be higher. I mean, when I had done all 4 sections which add to the marks and was waiting for the next section to start, I kind of thought to myself, realistically, I got about 2,800. I didn't really want to think that then, and I tried to convince myself that I got worse, in case I did get worse, otherwise I'd be really upset. But, yeah, so I thought I got about 2,800, but I actually got a fair amount higher. So, I'm not sure how much they scale it up, but you maybe rely on 100 marks, but it's best not to get too ahead of yourselves when thinking about that. Okay, now I'm going to go into some more detail on each of the 5 sections of the UKCAt, how to revise for them, and also what tips I can give after actually having done it now. It's going to make the video quite long, but timestamps if you want to skip any of the stuff you don't need, so I didn't want to split it up really. Okay, we'll start with the quantitative reasoning, although it's not the one you start with in the exam, but this one is the one which gives the most grief, I'd say, out of all the subjects, mainly because you'd have to kind of be a god to actually answer all the questions. Well, especially the questions that you'll get in the practice book, because those are very, well, they're not that difficult, but to do them in 36 seconds, which if you didn't know is the time you have to do each question, would be very, very difficult. So, yeah, in the exam, you only get a really bad on-screen calculator. It has so many faults, it's really awkward to use, but you just have to get on with it. The best advice I can give you about using that calculator is that practice using a numpad, because it will speed up your calculations so much. So I don't actually have a numpad on my laptop, so I couldn't practice with it, but if you have one, practice, because you'll save a lot of time. You also have to remember, though, on the calculator there's no delete button, so you can't just get rid of one digit, you have to cancel your whole sum. So delete button on your numpad won't work, you just have to use the mouse for that. And like I say, it's very simple, only has plus, multiply, divide and times. Multiply and times, the 4 ones, you know what I'm talking about. What else have I got to say about it? The questions in the exam, they were more based on graphs and charts than text. Like some of the practice ones, there was fairly large blocks of text, and you had to find the appropriate information and do a long calculation. There's not as much as that, so time doesn't run out as quickly in the exam as it did for some of the practice, but it's still, like, I still didn't finish it. In the actual exam, I didn't finish it. I think I did about 80% of the questions, which I was really pleased about, really, because I hadn't got that far when doing mocks and stuff. So 80%, and I got most of those right, I think, to have got the 750 out of 900 that I got. So I was pleased with how that section went. The questions that you get given, they aren't all 36 seconds. Some of them are meant to be a lot longer, some of them are meant to be a lot shorter. Some of them you have to learn how to do from just like looking at them at a glance. Like there's some really obvious, you have to work out the average, but then there's one answer that's really obvious, or ratios that you can do in your head, all that. Knowing that 0.555 equals 5/9, that saves time. I hope it does. It's difficult to think and record at the same time, but stuff like, because sometimes the answers you're given, they're in fractions, but obviously you only get decimals. So knowing that sort of stuff is useful. Also, being able to do basic or maybe slightly more advanced calculations in your head, like adding together 2-3 digit numbers. You should be doing that with your head, really. I mean, maybe if you're rapid with a numpad or something, like if you work in a shop, you might be able to do a bit better. You might be able to use a calculator for that, but whenever possible, like, use your head. It's a lot quicker. Like I mentioned earlier, the sections that you don't always get 4 questions per bit of information, so don't go in there like writing down important information from the graphs and stuff, because you may only have 1 question on it, so you're wasting time. But the absolute best advice I can give for the quantitative section is to not force yourself to do 100% of the questions by rushing them. It is far, far better to do like 80% like I did and get the majority of those right than do 100% and barely get any of them right. Because when I started revising, I was really concerned about not doing all of the questions, but you have to realise that barely anyone can actually do all the quantitative questions in the test, so focus on getting them right before you start doing them quickly. Someone should have told me that before I got a bit worked up about not being able to do the questions quick enough. So yeah, get them right and then start doing them quickly, even if you're like 3 or 4 times slower, because that's the situation I was in when I started revising. 3 or 4 times slower than I should have been, and I still wasn't getting them right because I was still panicking about time. But when you actually like slow down, you end up going quicker. More haste, less speed. No wait, less speed, more haste is one of the others. So I think that's it for the quantitative section. And on to abstract reasoning. This is the one that I guess I can talk about with the most authority, because I did well in the exam, far better than I could have hoped for. I was guessing like 30 to 40% originally when I was practicing it, so you can pick it up, you just need to focus. Okay, in the exam, I think all of the questions I got were the ones like you'll see in the book if you get it, where there's 2 like sets of 6 shapes with like all these complicated shapes inside them, and you have to work out the differences and then choose whether another shape fits into set A or set B, or neither. So I think all of mine were like that, but there's actually I think 5 different types it can ask you. In the book it doesn't prepare you for any of the ones apart from the 2 sets A and B, but there are ones like what you're given shapes and then something leads on to it, like sets of shapes that all have a sequence between them, and then you have to choose a shape that leads on from them, or stuff like that. Basically, if you do the mocks on the UKCAT website, in the admin section of it, it tells you all the different types of questions you can be asked about it, but the main ones definitely seem to be the bog standard ones, which is good because those are the ones I only really practiced for. Some of this is parroting what the book has said, but in case you don't have the book, then I guess this is useful. Look for the very obvious relationships between the 6 shapes in each set, because often it saves so much time, and in the exam a lot of them were fairly simple. Like I think I had 2 ones which were about symmetry, and that's pretty easy to spot. It seemed to be a trend that I should keep the microphone here. It seemed to be a trend that a fair amount of the questions were about position of the shapes, so remember to look for that early on. But going through in the actual exam, going through the questions, I saw the shapes and I couldn't do it. I had to move on. I flagged it for review so I could come back later, and I had to do that for about 3 sets of shapes at least, which is quite a bit. And when I went back, like I saw on at least 2 of them, I saw the relationship instantly. So don't be afraid to carry on. Time is quite limited in that. Technically it's like 13 seconds a question, but it's like a minute something for each set of questions, because it's normally 5 or 4 questions per set of shapes. So once you establish the relationship, it's a really quick like 10 seconds for the next 4 questions or something. So yeah, what else can I say about it? Wait, cut. I'll come back. Back. The book is really good for explaining like every single relationship that there's likely to be. I mean, it says there could be like an infinite number in the book, but I don't. It prepares you well. That's all that I can say. The questions are harder than what you'll get in an exam. Again, you might not like hearing that, but it's true. You may be unlucky with the shapes. They may be a lot harder. I think I was a bit lucky. I don't want to put it all down to luck, but of course some of it is. But yeah, I ended up managing to spot every relationship, even though you have to go back through it. And it's just keeping cool. If you can't see the relationship within a minute of looking, carry on, because I think it's a minute and 10 seconds you meant to spend on each set of shapes. Move on to the next one, then come back later. So that's my main advice for that section, I think. So now it's on to verbal reasoning. The section that I can unfortunately give you the least help with, I guess, if you go on my score for it, but I can still help you, hopefully. Main point is that if you are using the book to revise for this section, it's one of the least useful sections in the book to revise for it, because the majority of the questions in the exam I expect for you, and they were for me, to be like you're given 4 statements instead of true, false, or can't tell, and the book only contains true, false, and can't tell. In terms of length, I found that in the actual exam they were a little bit longer than in the book. It wasn't drastic. I mean, 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs was max, but they're not very long paragraphs. I mean, you are told repeatedly always just to skim them and then come back to the areas later to look into detail when you have to answer the questions. But I don't know, I read a lot, like a massive pile of books right there. So I could read quite quickly, and I could easily read like the whole section within the time instead of time to answer the questions. I mean, maybe that was the wrong thing to do, considering I did the weakest out of it. But if you are a quick reader, then I'd recommend reading it thoroughly the first time, which basically means not skipping at any words and not thinking to pause. The book gives good advice for the true, false, and can't tell questions. I did have some of them, just not that many. And time-wise, you will be a bit pushed, I reckon. You won't have a lot of time left. I think I had a tiny bit of time to review, to go back through, but not much at all, so stick to the time limits. Stick to like the time you have for each question. I guess if you wanted one main bit of advice for this section, is that just practice reading short passages in a short space of time, but actually picking up the information from them. You have to be really quick on your toes for reading it, and the better you are at reading, the better you do in the section, really. So yeah, that's my main piece of advice for this section. Now for decision analysis. So again, I'll be referring to what I learnt from this book in here, and that will help me practice. So in the book, the length of the codes you'll have to decode is like basically the same as what you'll get in the exam. So I'm sorry, it's actually easier in the exam. It's not like that for this section, unfortunately. I have found it very helpful to, when I was first practicing the questions for this section, was to not to write them out, because in the exam you will get 3 whiteboards, which are just laminated pieces of paper which you can write on the front and back. By the way, it is actually enough space for the whole exam. I doubt you'll run out. But yeah, don't write them down when you're first practicing. Try and remember them in your head as you're going along. You may have to like keep on going backwards and forwards in the code to then work out the code, because you may not be able to hold it all in your head at the same time. But it does help you be able to hold it. Teaches you to be able to hold more bits of information in your head at the same time, which is really, really useful for this section. So try it without writing anything down first for the majority of your practice, and I found that helped me a lot. Um, what else can I say about it? It's meant to be more based towards people that are good at languages, or people that are better at languages tend to do well at it. Well, I can say I'm not good at languages, but still got 880, so I wouldn't necessarily say that's true. Practice is a very important part of it. There's nothing you can really do for this apart from practice the actual questions. Like for the verbal reasoning, you might read more on quantitative analysis, learn your timetables if you don't know them or something like that. But for this, there is only really the questions. In the book, it gives you really detailed explanations of why each question is right or wrong. Compared to the exam, the actual exam, I would say that the 5 answers that you're given in the exam distinguish themselves slightly more from each other than they necessarily do in the book. It's a very subtle difference. Maybe it's just what questions I got given, but in the books they are generally very close together. In the paper, in the actual one, there tend to be some slightly more obvious differences. I'm not just sure. That might have just been because I was trying harder on the actual day, but yeah. And yeah, for the actual exam, I would recommend writing it down. That's what I did, only for the longer ones though. You waste time if you do it for the shorter one, but for the longer codes, just write down the words really quickly. It's fairly easy to do so, and then it will help you a lot when you're considering different options. And main piece of advice for this section is that if in the codes that you're given, if there's a word there, then there has to be either that word or something that means a similar thing, like a synonym, or something that that word could have been referring to. You're not going to have a passage that's one of the answers and it doesn't have any reference to one of the words that you were given in the code. So it's a good way to easily cancel out some of the other codes if it doesn't have that particular word. And you also have to be very wary of like the order of the words, but is to be able to discard ones quickly. That's useful in this section. Timing wise, you have a minute and 10 seconds each for each question, which is the longest out of the whole test. That's the longest you will ever get for a question, and it was reasonably comfortable getting through it. Like, you don't want to spend a minute on every question, because generally the first ones are very short and then they get a lot longer as you go on, although there are long ones mixed in the beginning and short ones mixed towards the end, but it's just a general trend. So don't always stick to a minute. Don't be constantly checking the clock. Do the first ones as quickly as you can, because you'll spend longer on the next ones. I think that's about it for that section. And now for situational analysis. Awareness you know the one I'm referring to. Okay, I don't think I properly explained this earlier. This isn't the score you get for this isn't added to your actual mark. You're put into bands as bands 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 is why do I start with 2? 1 is excellent. 2 is good, like above average or well above average, I think it says. Wait, I can look. That's because that's the one I got. Performed well and above average, so not well above average. 3 is below average, and 4 is like very bad. So there's no average, unfortunately. But I got 2, and that's kind of what I was hoping / expecting. I really didn't expect I'd get a 1 for that. So yeah, this is the section with the most amount of questions, like 70 or something of them, and you have like 26 minutes. But time honestly is not a problem for this section. I don't think it was just me, but you're given paragraphs which are like 3-4 lines on the screen, like half a screen, and it does, like when I was doing the mocks, I had like 10 minutes left over for for that section, and in the actual thing I had like 7 minutes because I was being a bit more careful left over. I had 7 minutes left over. But then there's still time to go through them. I don't think I ended up changing many of them, but time shouldn't be a problem with this. Although it may have been helped because I can read quite quickly. But yeah, you're given a very short paragraph, and then 4 statements generally about what you should do in the situation, or how important things are to consider in the situation. So honestly, I wouldn't say this section is very well written, because when I was doing the mocks, some of the questions were like, an example I'm sure you'll see is that a group of students have been told to work together and one of the students isn't pulling their weight, basically. And then on like one of the mocks, it was like, should you inform your academic tutor? And like the answer was very inappropriate, because they have been told to work as a team and it doesn't show teamwork. But then in another one, it had almost an identical question, but then the answer was just inappropriate, not awful, because there was no awful circumstance from telling the academic tutor. So it's difficult to know what to put, so I don't blame you if you're struggling to decide between two options. But yeah, like I said, the book doesn't have any practice for that, because it's written before this section was introduced. It's the first time it's been introduced is in 2013, this year. So, but on the mocks there are 70 questions in each mock, so you have to practice. Basically, be extremely ethical, don't care about what other people think, and always look after the patient and listen to what the patient has to say. It'll build up your own kind of idea of what it wants when you go through. Make sure after you've done the mock to review and look at the explanations for why it says you should have chosen that answer. But apart from that, can't help you that much. By the way, once you get onto this section, you're kind of home and dry, because your score has already been determined, and it's a lot less stressful than the other sections, just because there's not much thinking involved. There's only two. There's always four answers. They can be very appropriate but not ideal, inappropriate but not awful, or very inappropriate. Or there can be. You'll get given those options if you're asked what you should do in the situation, but then you can also be asked how important these things are, and it's like very important, you know. And so you always know what the answers are to choose quickly. It doesn't take much thinking. So yeah, I hope I've covered everything. I'll slot in some random clips if I think of anything more that's important, but I hope that's helped. Now on to the next bit. Now I'm just going to say a brief bit about the actual site where you take the test in one of the Pearson or Person centres or whatever. Basically, it's important to remember that it's not exactly like an exam hall that you're used to. There's like multiple computers there, people will be getting up and going, so you kind of have to expect some disturbance. They should provide earplugs or headphones, so that can cancel out the noise. I didn't actually need it because I was in a separate room. There was just a small box basically with a computer, so I was lucky with that. I think they try and do that for the UKCAt because it has a bit of a bigger desk and you have to write down. Well, some people like to write down stuff for the UKCAt, and I would advise doing so. But then if you are in a room, like, someone has to come in and check on you every so often, even though one of the walls is completely made out of glass and they can see you anyway. And I had a fire alarm go off in the middle of mine as well, so there may be a few disturbances, but the test centre people are nice. Like, you don't have to start exactly when it says on your appointment, just is fairly chilled, obviously. Just really important, don't forget identification, it's a must. Look on the website for what counts. Also, you are told to bring your email confirmation booking for the UKCAT. The information is also on the website. They didn't actually look at that for me, so it doesn't seem to be necessary, but they looked at identification quite closely, so you're not going to be able to do it without that. That's all I've got to say about the test. Oh no, one more thing. Make sure your pen is working. Even if it looks like it's working but it's a bit faint, ask for a new pen, because I did that. Well, I didn't ask for a new pen because it was a bit faint. I thought, oh, it'd last. I got to the first question, it was out, so just check before you start that it's got plenty of ink in. Yeah, that is it, I think. Now some advice if your test is in like 2 days or something and you've barely done any or haven't done any revision. So first bit of advice is postpone it if it at all possible, because I mean, to get a high mark, you really do need to practice a fair amount. You can probably get to an average mark without doing a huge amount, but still doing some. But if you haven't done any or barely done any, you're likely to get below average, and that's not a position you want to be in. So you can postpone it for free. You can rearrange it, so long as you have to do this like 3 days in advance. So then, if this is like the night before your exam, then best thing I can say is just keep your cool. Honestly, it's probably not going to be as horrible as you think it's going to be. Don't exhaust yourself staying up the whole night. Just look on the internet to see what type of questions there are, so you know what to expect, and you've probably got an idea kind of what the questions are from this video already. But yeah, just keep your cool, and if that's all possible, postpone it to actually do some proper practice. Now, the last bit of general advice. This video must be so long already, but hopefully you've learned important stuff from it. Basically, keep your cool, because going into the exam, I was more nervous than I was for any of my ASs or anything, just because you don't know what the questions are going to be on. Well, yes, you don't know what they're going to be on. Like with AS, you have a syllabus, you know what you're going to do, but for this, there's none of that. So that's always fairly nerve-wracking, or it is nerve-wracking for me. But honestly, it wasn't as bad as I had feared. I mean, it's still bad, of course, and is something which should be hated and whatever, but yes, like I say, not as bad as you're probably thinking it is. It is the reason why time constraints are so bad in this is because it's putting you under pressure to see how well you cope, because that is something obviously you need to be good at if you want to become a doctor. So just if you're panicking or something, it's not going to help at all. You just need to be cool, go through it methodically. If you can't answer a question quickly, then move on and come back to it later if you can. There's a flag for review button, so when you get to the end of the section you can go back quickly, so use that as well. That's really useful, especially in the abstract reasoning and situational analysis, mainly because in the situational analysis I reckon you'll have time left over, so you'll really want to review it. I made a mistake for not flagging for a review the questions in that section, so it was a lot slower to find the ones that I was unsure about later. Finally, I'm sure I've missed stuff out, so if you still have any queries relating to the UKCAt, send me a message or leave a question in the comments. I should be able to get back to you within 24 hours or something, because yeah, I'm sure I should be able to help you out with that. So good luck for everyone who's doing it in my year and in the future. But yeah, just keep your heads, and I wish you all the best.